Ready?
So we're going to do a roll call.
Right.
Okay. So starting with our chair, Director Gray.
Yes.
Okay, and then our committee member, Director Deere.
Here.
And then our committee alternate, Director Houston.
Here.
And I suppose for the record, Director Williams.
Here.
Okay, and I presume we do not have Director Alvarez. So with that, we'll return back to Director Gray. It seems we do have a quorum.
And thank you. I don't have the information in front of me. I apologize. So the next item, I believe, is public comment. Is that correct, Mr. General Manager?
That is correct. Public comment. So we have no public comment at this time. And I believe we have no public comment on the platform as well. If someone from the public would like to make a comment, they could make themselves known at this moment. And it appears we have no one interested in making a public comment at this time. So back to you, Director Gray.
Thank you. And the next item, please, just go to the agenda. Thank you, General Manager.
Okay, so our next item is presentations. And so we have no presentations at this time, Director Gray, Chair Gray.
Right, the next item.
Next item is action calendar. And we also have no items on our action calendar. So that would take us to our information calendar if you're ready to proceed with that item.
Yes, please.
Okay, so with our information calendar, we're fortunate to have our federal and state lobbyists present in the meeting today. And so I'm happy to introduce Pete Evich from Van Scoyoc and Associates. And so Pete, I'll hand it over to you, you and your team to make a presentation.
Great. Well, thank you again, General Manager Reed. And again, it'll be a pleasure to meet you in person sometime in the near future. Also want to thank Chair Gray and Board Chair Deere and Directors Williams and Director Houston as well, who I see all on the line. So we are just, we do want to extend our appreciation for this opportunity to present today. And as was indicated earlier, our West Basin team colleagues, Jeff Bowman, who co-leads our effort for West Basin, is present, as is Ashley Strobel with Van Scoyoc Associations, and she's participating as well. So I'll be running through a presentation with a PowerPoint deck here, but Jeff and Ashley will be available at the end to answer any questions in addition to myself. So we can start. If we can go to the next slide, that would be great. So I'm going to start off with a kind of a big picture snapshot of the political climate in DC. As we enter 2022 and over these last few months or so, it's been somewhat of a tough go for President Biden and the Democrat-controlled Congress. For the better part of 2021, they had been promoting and working on enacting their social and economic centerpiece legislation known as the Build Back Better proposal. It was originally a $3.5 trillion proposal that with spending and tax reforms included in there, and then ultimately scaled down to about $2 billion to broaden support. In the latter part of November, the House passed its version of the BBB, and but it's been, as I think a lot of you on the call know, that it's been a very high-profile battle over this legislation, and at the end of the year last year. Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, announced that he wouldn't be supporting it, and that imploded the effort on that legislation for that time. Compounded with that over the year, it's a major drag, especially for President Biden, has been rising inflation rates, concerns over the war in Ukraine, and some other issues have also been in the mix that have all have swirled together and have led to where his approval ratings are at a low. I think, in a recent vote, however, the bipartisan confirmation support for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court, however, was a very important victory for the White House, for President Biden and the Democrat-controlled Senate. And it's really a sign that there can be a path in Congress to achieve further big-ticket accomplishments. Next slide, please. So that said, with the BBB, I mean, what we're hearing right now is that President Biden and the Democratic leadership in Congress have not given up on advancing a scaled-down version of this legislation. Indications are talks and negotiations will be accelerating in the weeks and months ahead. Central to this, of course, is getting a deal that enlists the support of all 50 Democratic senators, which again involves the backing of Senators Manchin and also Senator Sinema Democrat from Arizona. So on this slide, the checklists are the kind of menu of options which seem to be on the table for this revised package. And as you can see, there's climate and energy provisions that they're looking to, that they think are going to be viable, some tax reform that can lead to deficit reduction, healthcare provisions related to the Affordable Care Act, and RX drug prices are also something that may be part of that package. We'll see what happens. I mean, this is going to pick up in the next few weeks here, and then it's between now and July whether or not they can get something through. But that will be I think a big effort that they're not willing to let go at this point. Just kind of to scale back, I mean, we as I mentioned, that the House passed the original BBB back in late November. There were some, a couple important water provisions in there, and a couple of them I have listed here on this slide. There was included in the original BBB the water conservation tax parity rebate. There was also $125 million for this alternative water source program, which would be the first ever national water reuse, water recycling grant program. There was also what would be the third tranche of funding for a federal low-income ratepayer assistance program. And so I think as the legislation, if it does move forward, the tax parity provision is certainly one that could be still part of the mix in the tax package. In terms of the other spending, it's hard to say at this point. Next slide, please. So shifting gears a little bit, with the enactment of the bipartisan infrastructure measure in mid-November, that was the signature accomplishment and major success piece for the president and Democrat-controlled Congress. The bill represents a massive federal investment in roads, transit, water, and other physical infrastructure. For several years running, a large-scale infrastructure measure has been discussed and contemplated in Congress, but with the passage and signing of the legislation, this national priority finally crossed the finish line. I won't spend time line iteming the billions of dollars that the legislation contains for various water programs. We have detailed these in several of our past monthly reports to the committee. But of course, we'd be happy to delve into any specific questions the board, General Manager Reed, or anyone may have during the Q&A session. For West Basin, the three agency funding buckets of most interest are with programs that lie within the Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and EPA. Next slide, please. as it relates to this bipartisan infrastructure law now, with as that passed mid-November, now with 2022 underway, the focus for the administration is federal agency implementation. So they're working on getting this historic level of funding distributed. In addition to the funding that was in there for existing programs, several new programs were established with the law. And funding is stemming from those new programs will take some time to get up and running as they're still in the process of being developed. Programs that were funded also, like the traditional Title 16 water recycling program, those dollars have already begun to move through, and a solicitation has moved forward this year. But there is a new Bureau of Reclamation grant program for large-scale water recycling projects. Those are for projects that are over $500 million and over. That new program is still being worked out by reclamation officials, and there's an expectation that it will launch later this year. There's also a new reclamation small groundwater storage program that was also funded in the infrastructure package, and that will be unveiled later in the year as well. A potential fly in the well, it shouldn't be too negative, but I was going to say a potential fly in the ointment could be these what's included in the infrastructure package, where these Buy American provisions. The existing Buy America requirements have focused on U.S.-made iron and steel. But the infrastructure package is now requiring that recipients of federal funding through that law would be required to only purchase manufactured products in the U.S. So while there are some waiver provisions incorporated into the law, the early tea leaves are that the administration and agencies are going to be stingy with those waivers. So we're watching that very closely. Next slide, please. So turning to the recently enacted FY22 Omnibus Appropriations Measure, I know the board is well aware of this news, but I'm happy to once again highlight the direct funding for West Basin that was contained in this measure, and that's the $3.8 million award to construct the North Gardena and Mills Memorial Park recycled water laterals. The funding for these projects was through a congressionally directed grant. These were formerly called earmarks. Earmarks were put on ice by Congress for a 10-year period, and they just returned in a limited fashion in the last appropriation cycle. And this is we were able to take advantage of that opportunity and the funding that occurred here. But really, you know, it was West Basin's congressional delegation members who advocated and championed this project funding, and that credit goes to Representative Waters and both Senators Feinstein and Padilla, and they were the ones who helped shepherd this funding through the process. The funding is going to be channeled to the Army Corps of Engineers as part of West Basin's congressionally authorized Harbor South Bay initiative. Just, you know, I know in terms of volume, for the type of projects that were funded in the state of California under this Army Corps umbrella that the Harbor South Bay project was eligible for, they're called Section 219 or environmental infrastructure projects. There were only 7 other ones that were funded throughout the state in the legislation, and this award was the largest of the total 8. So we've, on behalf of West Basin, we delivered thank you letters from the entire board of directors to Representative Waters, Senator Feinstein, and Senator Padilla's office, which expressed West Basin's deep gratitude for their steadfast support of these important water recycling projects. I will one last point to say that, when, as I mentioned, Congress reintroduced earmarks in this year, and in the new fashion that they've brought them back, there's a lot of layers and hoops, which makes sense. There's a focus on accountability and transparency, but securing this funding entailed a highly competitive and involved process, and would not have really been possible. I really have to do a hat tip to the fantastic work by the West Basin team. So I wanted to acknowledge their efforts related to this project funding outcome as well. So West Basin and VSA will begin working with the Army Corps of Engineers to direct this funding to these water recycling projects so they can ultimately be moved to construction. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier the water related funding contained in the infrastructure.
Hey, Pete.
Yes. Yes.
I apologize. This is EJ here at the headquarters. And before we move on, I did want to say thank you very much to you and the VSA team, Ashley and Jeff, for the ongoing work when it comes to the projects that we got funded through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This was a multi-year process. I know it's always fun to get funded, and it seems like it happens very quickly through kind of an immediate action by Congress, but years of effort was dedicated to this. Clearly, we want to say thank you to Representative Maxine Waters, as well as Senators Feinstein and Padilla. But I also want to say thank you very much to the West Basin Board of Directors. A lot of patience was provided and a lot of legwork as far as introducing, discussing these projects at every opportunity. So you mentioned kind of the West Basin team effort, but I wanted to really acknowledge VSA as well as the West Basin Board of Directors. A big win, I would say, and I look forward to seeing these projects in a few years get completed.
Appreciate those words, EJ, and yeah, when I did mention the team, it really was everyone who was involved, and yeah, it's these fundings for these projects related to Harbor South Bay have been kind of years in the works, and this opportunity was one that we were able to take advantage of. So that really was great. So thank you. Related to this slide, I mentioned earlier the water-related funding and the infrastructure package. So in tandem with West Basin staff, we are now evaluating these opportunities and other funding sources, including, as we mentioned, the earmark process to prioritize West Basin's needs moving forward. So this slide is certainly not all inclusive, but it zeroes in on some of the key federal water programs, which we believe can be central to assist West Basin in its future project plans. We understand that West Basin is examining some exciting opportunities to work locally and partner in regional efforts on potential water recycling and facility and treatment projects. And not long ago, VSA participated with West Basin's team in a productive meeting with WRD officials on this type of collaboration. So we look forward to working with West Basin as the district strategically puts a plan in place to implement these regional project partnership endeavors. So, as looking on this slide, we start off with those reclamation related programs that many of us are familiar with, and EPA opportunities. And it's also important to point out that through our work on the congressionally authorized Harbor South Bay initiative, there is still approximately $30 million, which West Basin can vie for in the coming years. And that, again, is in tandem with the Army Corps of Engineers. So these are our exciting programs and opportunities, and so we wanted to highlight that we're looking at these and working closely with West Basin on our next directions. So I was going to move to the next slide. Just a couple items on the federal water related, just on federal water related legislation moving ahead here in 2022. And while the infrastructure package provided a significant infusion of funding to Bureau of Reclamation Western Water grant programs, it was $8.3 billion in total. There are a number of important programs to West Basin and us that, such as the Title 16 program, that have expired congressional authorizations. And while this issue is separate from the already appropriated infrastructure funding that is coming through and will be coming through over the next 5 years, the authorization lapse jeopardizes funding for these programs through the annual appropriations process. So in an effort to reauthorize and update a number of expired Reclamation Western Water grant programs, Senator Feinstein will soon be introducing legislation that she's calling the STREAM Act. Her office has distributed a draft of the proposal, which extends and increases authorized program levels over a 5-year period. I spoke with Senator Feinstein's staff last week, and they anticipate introduction of the legislation sometime in early May. So it should be formally released in the next few weeks. And given the bill's focus on Title 16 and other key programs, we'll provide a draft letter of support for the legislation for the board's consideration and anticipation that they would want to be supportive. Also, with FY 2023, there's the new budget and appropriations process, and that's kicked off. This began with the release of the president's FY 23 budget proposal on March 28th. The president's budget proposal advocates for first-time funding for, I think it's approximately 20 EPA-related targeted water programs, which were created but not funded through the infrastructure package. So included among those 20 projects that are in the president's proposal for funding are the Alternative Water Source Program, and as I mentioned previously, that would be a first in the nation water recycling and water reuse program. Another program funded, a first-time program under EPA is called the Mid-Size and Large Drinking Water System Infrastructure Resilience and Sustainability Program, which will offer competitive EPA grants to community water systems serving more than 10,000 people, which would address climate, extreme weather, and cyber-related challenges. So ultimately, Congress will decide which programs it will include in the FY23 appropriations measures, and the annual congressional spending bills will begin to take shape. They'll start to be released starting in June, and we'll be keeping West Basin up to date and apprised on water-related program funding highlights as those occur. Next slide, please. Just very briefly, a few areas of focus on the federal agency regulatory side. Some important regulatory actions on the horizon and the water sphere include EPA's PFAS action plan or roadmap. While there are a number of regulatory goals which were outlined in that document, the pending proposed rule designating PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substances under the Superfund law is expected sometime this spring, and a proposed rule establishing national limits for PFOA and PFOS in drinking water is anticipated for this fall. There's the ongoing Waters of the U.S. issue, which is defining what are and what are not navigable waters of the U.S. falling under the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act. It's an ongoing policy struggle for many, many years, and it continues on. Next slide, please. So moving into an operational aspect update, I thought we would cover given the COVID pandemic restrictions on access to federal buildings and the Capitol, just kind of give you a current status of where that is as it relates to the opening up of the Capitol complex and federal buildings for meetings. At this point, in-person meetings are occurring and certainly have been picking up, and we're now starting to see there's actually DC actual in-person fly-ins are beginning to occur. Also as part of this, the Capitol was allowing tours of up to 15 people. Those are starting now to take place. Interestingly, though, a time-consuming element related to access to the House and Senate Capitol building is still in place, however, which is an existing requirement whereby staff have to come outside the building to meet visitors, sign them in, and then escort them to the designated office. As it turns out, this requirement now that's still in place is less related to COVID, but rather is more of a security issue. Capitol Hill police are understaffed by almost 400 officers. This is in large part due to the significant number of Capitol officers who left the force either through retirements or a slew of resignations that happened after the January 6, 2021 riot. So, due to the fact that requirement still exists, the escort process, there are a fair number of offices that still seemingly prefer to do these virtual meetings in light of that. Additionally, there's what happened through COVID, obviously, is there's a much more wider acceptance of telework now. And so you also additionally have many staff work from home many days, come to the office certain days. So virtual meetings, I think, are here to stay, even though we're returning to a more normal schedule with in-person meetings on Capitol Hill, and also with the federal agency side. They're a little bit more behind, but I think most federal agencies, I think starting later this month and moving now, are beginning to open. So we'll being able to meet with staff in the buildings. Although also on that front, telework, however, has kind of taken over on the federal side as well. And I think for the agency staff, we're going to continue to see a lot of meetings on the virtual side because of that. And I think, as has been kind of maybe much reported, for the Aqua decided to move its DC advocacy trip to July, and it's normally in March. So I think it was a wise move to move it to this month, because we're to the month of July, because it's things will be logistically a lot easier to move through the halls of Congress and through federal agencies. So it'll be interesting, though, to get to see how those meetings go, and if the engagements are even less of an issue than they are today. Next slide, please. So as we're all well aware, this is every 10 years. It's the redistricting process, and I think the board is familiar that the district redistricting maps came out in late December, and this here is a picture of that, which I think we've all seen. I think one of the big items, as we know, I think not part of our delegation really before, but will be moving forward, is Representative Brad Sherman, who is going to be Congressional District 32 up there in the northwest, and covering the Malibu, Topanga area. But for the other districts, with Representative Liu, Representative Bass's district, although as we know, she's running for mayor of LA, so that will be a different occupant moving forward. And then, but with that 37th seat and the 43rd with Representative Waters and Representative Barragan and the 44th district, a lot of that is very, very, very similar. Some slight movement, but very similar. Obviously, there's district that is a a wide open district. That's the merger of the Lowenthal and Roybal Allard district that's to the east. So it will be interesting to see how that shakes out. Next slide, please. And this is our last slide here for the presentation. You know, I know we have 204 days still to the midterm elections, but because it's an election year, we're going to see legislative activity ramp down once the August recess hits. And there's only so many days in the calendar in September and very little in October, and there'll be very little appetite to get much significant done from a legislative perspective at that point. There'll probably be a ramp up in a post-election lame duck session, but really between now and the end of July is really when the most activity needs to occur. And just from the political side in terms of the elections themselves, there's a lot of retirements we're seeing, particularly on the House side. There's 47 total members are either retiring or resigning or stepped down. 30 of which are Democrats, 17 are Republicans. We have listed here in this slide the California members who are retiring or resigned. So, you know, the redistricting map is, you know, throughout the country is, I think on balance, it's different from state to state, but the reports are that that Republicans for the House side will have a slight advantage there, and that in addition to the off-year election from a presidential off-year election cycle, traditionally has the power, the party in power is usually in jeopardy of losing seats, and that's still the case. So we'll see how things go. I mean, to me, things are 204 days is still a lifetime away from a political side, but all the prognosticators who are looking at crystal balls believe it's that the Democrats will have a tough time retaining the House if the current climate holds, and the Senate is not as dire because there's more Republican seats that are up for play in the Senate than Democrat seats, and of the 33 total seats, only 10 are really competitive. But it's more of a struggle on the Democrat side than it is on the Republican side. So next slide. So that is the end of our presentation. And so with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Can you hear me?
Yes, Madam Chair, it's Director Houston.
All right, Director Houston, please. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And so thank you very much, Pete, for the report, and also you and your team, Jeff, and welcome, Ashley. I just want to hit on a couple of things really fast. I mean, we all know there's a lot going on in Washington right now, and I think you put it succinctly and well that it's probably not looking good for the Democratic Party by the end of this year. But for what it's worth, a couple things. I'm really looking forward to, yes, in July that Aqua is going to be in DC. So at this point, I do plan to come out there, and looking forward to seeing you guys in person. One of the things I am just thinking longer term is hopefully by next year's spring, or winter spring, we'll be able to come out and do our annual ledge trip, assuming meetings are more comparable in the Capitol. But last 2 or 3 things here. I thought I'd just like to put out there. I think you hit a lot of the right points that we're on, and I think some of the issues that are pressing for me this coming year will be continued interest in water affordability, so that the low income water ratepayer assistance programs, any of those kind of things. I'm very interested in where that moves forward, and how West Basin could be able to support those efforts. One one thing, I still believe the turf removal rebates that we promote out here in California, if I'm not mistaken, those get taxed at the federal level. I think we're trying to work on a fix at the state level, but the federal level, that has not gone anywhere thus far. So I think that should be one of the things we continue to keep in our wheelhouse. So if we could make sure that we're talking about that, and if there's any movement of California water districts to push that, I think that should be one of our biggest, proposals we push hard right now. Cybersecurity, that's always been an interest of mine. And I'm glad to see that that's getting much more relevance today in the water utility space. And so I think we should take that very seriously. And so I'm, again, also looking forward to that as one of the things that we monitor. And last two things, one is I'm looking forward to, Representative Brad Sherman being part of our delegation. I think most of us here in the Los Angeles area we know him or met him over the years, but it'll be nice to have him as part of our delegation. And so I look forward to working with him and his staff down the road, and how he can hopefully be instrumental in some of our advocacy. And then last but not least, I'm just curious, Senator Murkowski, is she up this election cycle? I don't remember. I'm not paid that much attention up in Alaska, but is she up yet?
She is up for reelection. I'm corrected on that, right, Jeff? She is up for reelection.
I think you're correct, Pete.
Yeah, and I think, yes, she is. And I know that actually, interestingly, Senator Manchin from West Virginia has actually endorsed her candidacy. So
Yeah, I think I heard that. I think I heard that. Yeah, she was out here recently, and I saw it online, but she did a talk at USC. But I just remember she's been really instrumental in working with us on water in the West, and I certainly hope she continues to serve up there. But assuming everything goes in that direction, I would love it if we continue to, maybe develop some more working relationship with her. Because I think she's just been a really good voice on water policy for us, and has been bipartisan. So anyway, that's just put a little feather in your ear or something like that. I'm really anxious to continue working with the other senators that have been helpful to us. And so that's all the comments I have right now, but thank you so much for the work you guys do. And, looking forward to seeing you in person when we get to. And we did have a very productive year in the midst of everything. So thank you for your diligence on behalf of West Basin.
Thank you, Director Houston. I appreciate that. I'll just comment quickly. We certainly are, having the new face and Representative Sherman. That's from our service area perspective is. It's great, and we do look forward to working and meeting with his staff, and we're going to be starting those inroads, this year, and getting those introductions in place. And on the tax conservation, the turf tax rebate issue, that was in the original ballot, Build Back Better, that passed out of the House, and I do think there is and we will get West Basin's voice in there as part of that. If there's this revamped Build Back Better that they're trying to do, there will be tax provisions, and that's a real opportunity, I think, for that. I mean, that's a long time in coming, and it would be great to get that finally across the finish line. So thank you.
All right. Any other comments? All right, well, Steve, Jeff, and Ashley, and I can't see anyone on the line, but I think I named everybody from your firm. Thank you very much for the report this morning, and thank you very much for all your efforts. And I know you referenced the team at West Basin, and we're very proud to work with you. And, from my perspective, that you have been tremendous. Your firm has been tremendous in making sure that our voices are heard in Congress, and that we've been successful as a team together. So appreciate your efforts. Look forward to working with all of you. And I know kind of talked about Aqua's trip, but I assume that West Basin will not have a trip to DC, an advocacy trip to DC this year. I guess that's a question to the general manager and kind of what your perspective is, Steve and Jeff and Ashley. Greg,
Yeah.
have you thought about that?
Well, I think it would be great if we can have an advocacy trip to DC. I think that may be something that we can talk more about
Okay.
if there's an opportunity to do so. I think the success that we've had with the team here and being able to land funding for some of our important projects is fantastic. I'll join EJ in congratulating everyone involved for that. But as we continue to develop regional programs, it's going to be more important for us to advocate for funding for those, in particular as those may be in the early stages of maybe conceptual planning, not necessarily shovel ready. However, that planning effort may be quite large in spending as well. And so being able to educate and advocate for those, I think would be in our best interest to do so. In particular, as we solidify maybe our partnerships with our neighboring agencies like LA Sanitation, LA Department of Water and Power, Water Replenishment District. So having said that, I think if there's an opportunity for us to do a trip in the near term, that would be fantastic.
All right, well, maybe you can come back to the board with a recommendation. So I just want to kind of mention that because I know that DC is opening up and we have not done that because of the pandemic. So just want to bring that up and maybe come back to the board with a recommendation. And I also want to thank EJ. All right, thank you, Greg. And EJ, thank you for your leadership in terms of the success we've had with the team here at West Basin and the board and with Jeff and Pete and Ashley. So thank you very much. But again, thank you guys. Sorry can't see you online, but look forward to seeing you in DC one of these days. But again, thank you for your report this morning, for all your efforts.
Absolutely, Committee Chair Gray, and we really, really appreciate all of the work that you and the entire Board of Directors do. We're honored to represent West Basin and DC, and we do look forward to seeing you again. And but again, I do appreciate all your words, and we will certainly be in touch. So thank you all.
Yeah, it's really been a pleasure working with you guys. I know the work is really important work, but when you enjoy working with folks, it's an added, it's a plus. So we'll go to the next item. Greg, Mr. General Manager, what is the next item, please?
So continuing with our legislative update, we also are joined by Matt, I think it's V, our Senior Water Policy and Resources Analyst. So Matthew, if you could please share your report as well.
Great. Thank you, Greg. And Chair Gray and members of the board and committee, I will be providing the state legislative affairs update today. And that starts on packet page 5 of the agenda. I won't be going through it linearly. I'll kind of be bouncing around a little bit. So I'll go ahead and start on packet page 7, if that's possible. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the big action that occurred at the end of March. Governor Newsom issued a sweeping executive order to implement new actions that are aimed at addressing and mitigating the ongoing effects of drought and climate change. This new executive order does a number of things. It maintains all of the previous drought emergencies and orders from last year. So all 58 counties in California continue to be under drought emergencies. It keeps the 15% voluntary water use reduction targets in place for all of California.
All right.
I'm sorry? Okay.
I'm sorry,
but
please continue.
Okay. But it also lays out a number of new requirements. So the first first major one is that each urban water supplier with a water shortage contingency plan must implement at a minimum shortage response actions that align with their shortage level 2 of their contingency plans. Now, this doesn't directly impact West Basin since we're already at a shortage level 3 as of last November, but it will impact most of our retail agencies who have been or who will continue to be at a shortage level 1. So they'll have to escalate their shortage level to 2 and to implement new response actions. And staff plans to work together. We already are kind of working together with our retailers. We also plan to work with as many of the 17 cities in our service area as we can to help implement those level 2 response actions that will lead to decreased water usage in our service area. The executive order also requires a preliminary water supply and demand assessment by June 1st, with final submittal by July 1st. Originally, there was just going to be one submittal date of July 1st, but now they've introduced this new preliminary submittal deadline of June 1st. So again, this is something that West Basin, we're already working on this with our consultant, and we're also developing a plan to educate and partner with our municipal retail agencies to help them complete their own assessments, because we're finding in talking with them recently that they're just not up to speed, all of them, with all of the current requirements. So that's something that we're working to make sure that they're able to be successful in completing their own supply and demand assessments. Another big thing coming out of this executive order is the State Water Board will be working to define non-functional turf. So what that means, and then also with the ultimate goal of banning the irrigation of non-functional turf in the commercial, industrial, and institutional sectors. So this is a big thing. There had been talks of possible legislation in the state this year that hasn't happened yet. So for now, the State Water Board will be kind of in charge of determining what happens with non-functional turf. It also finally it expands inspection of illegal diversions, wasteful uses of water, and it also promotes many of the types of programs that West Basin has invested in groundwater recharge, increasing storage, and supporting water transfers between areas that need water from those that might have a surplus. In addition to the executive order, on March 29th, the governor and other members of his administration announced an MOU to improve ecosystems and conditions in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Bay Delta. This will be an 8-year program that would provide new water flows for the environment to help fish populations recover. It'll create new and restored habitat for wildlife, and it will help fund environmental improvements and water purchases needed to support some of these activities. Just a note that Metropolitan is a signatory to this MOU. And the other thing is that state and federal agencies have also announced an agreement with Sacramento River contractors on how to manage 2022 operations on the Sacramento River. So together, these two actions are what we kind of call the voluntary agreements. So it shows that they're starting to resume some of the talks and some of the progress towards getting these voluntary agreements into place that ultimately will seek to benefit water users, agriculture, wildlife, and the environment. There's been concerns about the initial MOUs expressed by both sides, both the environmentals and water users. So there's a whole lot that remains to be worked out. As we all know, the Bay Delta discussions have been going on for a long time. So I don't think we expect a quick resolution, but they are making progress, which is a good thing. And then finally, the last governor action that I'll talk about is on April 4th. He unveiled a new California climate adaptation strategy. This takes a look at a number of different things: water, wildfire. It contains 6 key priorities that will support future resiliency actions in California. It is separate and distinct from the California Water Resiliency Portfolio, which was first implemented in 2020 and was actually recently updated in January 2022. But it adds some new language and a guideline for the challenges that California is facing. If we could jump back up to packet page 5, I'm now going to go through kind of the calendar and what the legislature has been up to. So the legislature returned from their spring recess last week, and they've jumped back into holding policy committee hearings. And you'll see the list of upcoming deadlines here. So April 29th, next week, that serves as the last day for policy committees to hear and pass any fiscal bills introduced in their House. The following week, May 6th, will be the last day for policy committees to hear and pass non-fiscal bills to the floor of their House of introduction. May 20th will be the final day for fiscal committees to hear report bills to the floor. And then finally, May 27th is the last day for each House to pass bills introduced in that House of introduction. Once that happens, the bills that were introduced by the Assembly will go over to the Senate. Any of the bills that are still alive and any of the Senate bills will then go over to the Assembly. Going back down to packet page 7, I'll now just give a brief update on the budget. The governor's May budget revise is expected to come out sometime in the next month. I think EJ provided an overview of this, or maybe our lobbyist did last month. There's a big surplus that the legislature is still kind of trying to figure out what they want to do with. They're also starting to run into what they call the state appropriations limit, or the GAN limit, where they have so much revenues coming in, but they only have a certain amount of appropriations that they can do with that. So there's talks of potentially having to reduce taxes or take some other actions to kind of resolve that. So they're starting to run into some of those issues that will take effect more in the upcoming fiscal years. As we presented before, there's $750 million for drought resilience and drought response in the January version of the budget. There's talks though of whether or not this might increase in the May revise. And then West Basin and our lobbyist, Neema Pappas and Associates, have been working with other stakeholders and our elected delegation to advocate for $750 million for water recycling in the final version of the budget. And this would obviously benefit West Basin and many of our fellow water agencies in future years as we evaluate and invest in our water recycling programs. So now I'm going to move on to some updates on specific pieces of legislation. So if we could move down to packet page 9. So I'm not going to go into detail on all of these. I'll just take a few of them. The first one is the one that we have a position on. The board took a position on this. AB 2142 by Assemblymember Gabriel. This is the bill that would exempt grass or turf removal rebates from state income. As Director Houston pointed out, there's no corresponding measure on the federal side yet, but that's something that we're hoping will go forth this year on the state side. West Basin does have a support position on this bill that's been communicated to our delegation. Also are joining a coalition of water agencies led by Aqua to support the bill. Co-sponsors of this bill are Aqua and the California Water Efficiency Partnership. No opposition has been brought forth so far, and it was heard for testimony in March. It's scheduled for its first vote on May 9th in the Assembly Revenue and Taxation Committee. So that's kind of what's next for that bill. Moving on to the next one, let's see, this bottom of packet page 10 is SB 1124 by Senator Archuleta. This was originally a Central Basin bill that had sought to fund programs and projects that would protect some of the at-risk communities, some of the drinking water systems that were located in the Central Basin area. However, on March 14th, this bill was gutted and amended into a bill that now relates to establishing public health goals for manganese. And so staff, once we saw that bill had been amended, staff reached out to WRD and a couple of our groundwater pumpers and wanted to inquire about, manganese and whether it's an issue. In our area, we've been told that it's not a major issue in West Basin. It does seem to be a little bit more of an issue in some of the communities in the Central Basin. So for now, we're just watching this bill, and it's no longer related to Central Basin specifically. The next bill that I'll talk about is on the following page, packet page 11, SB 1157 by Senator Hertzberg. This is a bill that would establish new indoor residential water use standards that are more restrictive than what is currently in law. If you'll recall, last year, there was a bill, AB 1434 by Assemblymember Friedman, that was held up earlier this year. This bill came out after that. And just to kind of refresh your memories, beginning in 2025, it would establish indoor water use limits to 47 gallons per capita per day instead of 52.5. And then starting in January of 2030, that would reduce down to 42 GPCD instead of 50. So this was based on joint recommendations by Department of Water Resources and the State Water Resources Control Board for progressing water efficiency standards in California. It is opposed by a coalition of water agencies led by Aqua and CMUA. Their arguments are that there's some potential burdensome costs to water agencies for implementing this, for having to invest in infrastructure and technologies. There's also potential unintentional adverse impacts on wastewater, recycling, et cetera, some of the things that West Basin does. On the advice of our state lobbyists, staff has not yet taken the bill to the board yet for a position, but we are continuing to closely track and evaluate the impacts of this bill. So it did pass Senate Natural Resources and Water, and it will now go to the Senate floor. It skipped the Senate appropriations. So that's the next step for that one. AB 1845. This is a bill by Assemblymember Calderon. This would authorize Metropolitan to use the design build procurement process for certain regional recycling projects or other infrastructure projects. Design build would allow Met to build projects that mitigate impacts of drought in a more timely and cost-efficient manner. It's a model that's used by a lot of other local agencies throughout California for building various types of projects, supported by many of Metropolitan's member agencies. No opposition registered so far, and it did pass Assembly Local Government on March 23rd, and it next goes to Water Parks and Wildlife on April 26th. And then finally, the last bill I just want to touch on here is Senate Bill 1469 by Senator Bradford. This is a bill that's co-sponsored by all of our IOUs. So Cal Water, Golden State, and California American are co-sponsors of this bill. It would support the decoupling of water utility sales from revenues forecasts. And the proponents say that decoupling leads to better water conservation outcomes and cost savings. Decoupling has been something that's been in place for energy utilities since the 1980s. But hasn't been as prevalent in water utilities. There was a hearing yesterday in the Senate Energy, Utilities, and Communications Committee. It did pass out on a unanimous vote. And so that's another bill that we don't have a position on, but because it does affect all three of our IOUs, we're going to keep a close eye on that one as well. And then just moving down to packet page 12, you can see the full list of bills that we are tracking in conjunction with Nia Mellapapis and Associates. I'm not going to go into any of these bills at this time, but if you do see any bills that you would like us to come back to you with in the future to hear more information about, we're happy to do that. So just let us know. And then the final thing that I'll just mention, which is on packet page 8, bottom of packet page 8. There was a special election that was held on April 5th to replace former Assembly Member Autumn Burke, who was the representative for the 62nd District. Burke had resigned from her seat late last year, and the results of that election, special election, was there was no majority vote winner. Nobody was above 50%. So the top 2 vote getters will now move to a June 7th runoff. Those 2 folks are Tina McKenna, who was Burke's former chief of staff. She received 39% of the vote. And then Robert Pullen Miles, who's the mayor of Lawndale, received about 35% of the vote. So pretty close. So we do expect a close race in the June primaries for that election seat. And I did want to just mention that our consultant put together a list of seats that are up for election throughout the state, throughout our area for the June 7th primaries. So we'll be working with the admin team to forward all of the board of directors a PDF of that provides an overview of all the upcoming elections, which of course are subject to change as people change their minds on which seats they want to run for. And with that, that completes my state legislative affairs update. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any questions?
Nope.
All right, I don't hear anyone speaking up, so thank you very much for your report. What's the next item, please, General Manager?
Okay, and thank you, Matt, for that presentation. That now takes us, Chair Gray, to our internal staff update on Metropolitan Water District program updates. And our water policy and resources analyst, Tammy Hurley, will be providing that report. So Tammy, please, if you will.
Thank you, Greg. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Gray, Member Deere, and Board Director. Good afternoon. So this report summarizes recent activities at the Metropolitan Water District that will include the budget and rate, the project labor agreement, outreach advertising, drought response, and then I will conclude with an update on the water supply condition. So starting with the budget and rate. On Monday, April 11th, during the Finance Committee, Metropolitan staff presented 3 options for the board's consideration to adopt the biannual budget and rate. And the board provided input and feedback to Metropolitan staff, and they expressed an interest to lower the overall rate increases by proposing to come back and propose additional reductions. And so Metropolitan staff worked again after the committee meeting to develop a 4th option for the board's consideration, and then to propose a 5% increase per year with a reduction by making additional modification to the option 3 that was presented earlier. So the next day, on Tuesday, April 12th, the board adopted the budget and rates that were outlined under option 4 that was presented to them. And under this option, the overall rate increase works out to be 5% for both calendar year 2023 and 2024. And Metropolitan staff put forth significant effort in adjusting the rate calculations and budget reductions in trying to manage the constraints and implications. So in summary, to avoid a higher rate increase in calendar years 2023 and 2024, the budget includes additional cuts from the agency's operations budget, along with substantial reductions across all departments of the agency. So these reductions are in addition to cuts that were already presented in the earlier options, and new revenues were also identified in order to reduce the rate increases to bring it down to 5% each year. Overall, this budget assumes obtaining additional annual miscellaneous revenues through fiscal year ending 2032. So along with these cuts, Metropolitan will continue to identify new funding sources, which include grant opportunities and partnership to leverage the investment in Metropolitan system. So this budget has identified receiving $13 million in grant funding, reduced department O&M budget by additional $10 million, and increase their vacancy rate at 5%. So this determines the revenue requirement to be $1.6 million in fiscal year ending 2023 and $1.7 million in fiscal year ending 2024. Also, this option for modified elements to future rate increases beginning calendar year 2025 that is planned for a 7% rate increase. So the second slide shown in this memo shows the fiscal impact for metropolitan projects for the rate options for biannual budget and 10-year projections. So shown here is a 5% increase for the next 2 years. And for the long-term rate increases, calendar year 2025 shows an increase of 7%, followed by 6% in calendar year 2026. And then in calendar year 2030, the rate increase is projected to be at 5% that year and then the following years. That's what we're looking at right now. So this budget will fund priority operations and maintenance projects, as well as important drought-proofing local supply projects. And it's important to also note that the budget does not include any limitations of the demand management programs. So as part of this adopted budget, the general manager will come back to the board in December this year for a mid-year budget review. So that concludes the update. There was a lot of fast-moving activities this month at Metropolitan regarding this particular subject. So before I move any further to the other topics, I wanted to take a minute to see if there are any questions.
And Jenny, are there any questions?
Madam Chair, this is Director Houston.
Yes,
Hi,
yes,
Director.
please.
Hey, thank you, Tammy. I really don't have a question. I actually just wanted to put in a positive comment to say I was very pleased to see that that new proposal was introduced at the 11th hour and that it did pass unanimously by those present at that meeting. And I was listening, I was online, I was watching. But remember, we had some discussion about that at this meeting last month, as well as our board meeting. And, a couple of us expressed our concerns regarding the proposed increases that had been presented. So at the end of the day, I do think that Metropolitan did the right thing. And I think that just like everyone right now, we have to really look at our budgets. We have to decide what we are prioritizing and how we look at increasing, rates to our constituents at this time. Because while the economy is strong in some areas, it's very weak or tenuous in others. And so anyway, I know that this really continues opening the door for the next 2 years after that, where Metropolitan's making major choices as to what the future holds, as well as West Basin and other agencies. So all that being said, I'm just glad to see the outcome was, in my opinion, favorable. That everybody could come together and get this accomplished. I think that says a lot for both the staff and for the board of Metropolitan, and it also helps us at West Basin in our planning.
Right. And Director Houston, thank you for those comments. I agree that it was heartwarming to see the entire board who was there vote for option 4. The GM and staff worked very hard, Catano and him, the budget staff, to really bring back an option after listening to the committee meetings. And I'm sure you were online and heard some of the statements that the board members had. Water conservation was certainly a consideration that budget was not reduced. And you heard that some of the other things that Tammy mentioned. And so it was a great compromise because we wanted to make sure we could still function. The other part that I think really made our board all come together on it is that the general manager will come back with a review this December and just kind of let us see how things are functioning, because we all know that water supply, it's dwindling, and that's the kind of the heart of Met's revenue. So it was a great discussion. I was very pleased at the committee and what was brought back, which was an option 4. So thank you for your comments before, and all the other, board members from West Basin who have shared their thoughts too. And I'm very proud of the board that came together. So I just want to make those comments. And we all are concerned about affordability and making sure we do have a reliable source of water too, and keeping all our agencies whole. So I'm very pleased with the outcome. Any other questions or comments? And thank you, Director Williams, because you're right there involved, engaged in the process, and thank you for your support too. Okay,
Thank you for those
Tammy,
comments.
I don't have other comments. All right, can you go on, please?
Yes, thank you. So the next item for a brief update is a project labor agreement. The Metropolitan Board authorized the general manager to negotiate a project labor agreement, also referred to as a PLA. So this PLA is intended to cover construction contracts with a value of $5 million or greater within their CIP program. And Metropolitan has had prior experience with PLAs and were successfully utilized for the projects related to Diamond Valley Lake, the inland feeder, and Lake Skinner improvement programs. So this cooperative approach is anticipated to prove itself to be successful in continuing toward positive work environment on these projects. And moving on to advertising and outreach. Last month, Metropolitan Board authorized entering into a 3-year agreement with for media placement services for a multilingual water conservation campaign. So last fall, because of the persisting drought conditions, Metropolitan staff informed the board a plan to utilize available funding from the conservation credits budget to continue an outreach campaign for a few months up until winter. And their staff also informed the board of plans to initiate a request for proposals seeking media placement services for a 3-year multimedia and multilingual campaign. So this outreach plan also includes more targeted advertising for the State Water Project dependent areas and those member agencies who rely on water sources from that State Water Project. So this advertising supports and helps facilitate the demand management program goals and objectives of Metropolitan. These services will begin this month and they will continue up until fiscal year ending 2024. And this funding will purchase advertising to promote Metropolitan's water use efficiency programs and then drive traffic to the Be Water Wise website, which is their agency's primary water saving portal for water saving tips and access to conservation rebates. So moving on to drought related items, included in this memo is information on drought response actions that has recently occurred, which includes the governor's drought executive order, as Matt had mentioned earlier that you've already heard, and then Metropolitan General Manager statements in response to the executive order, along with website links to other important announcements related to the drought. So that moves us to the next item of water supply allocation proposal. Now, last month, DWR notified the state water contracting agencies of a reduced allocation of 5%. And to help offset the reduced allocation, DWR will provide additional water for any unmet critical human health and safety needs, measured at 55 gallons per person per day. So this includes water for indoor uses like drinking, cooking, sanitation. However, this does not include water for other uses such as commercial, industrial, and institutional needs. So Metropolitan will be requesting water deliveries from DWR to satisfy unmet human health and safety needs. And DWR requires all contractors receiving human health and safety needs water to implement robust conservation actions with mandatory requirements. So Metropolitan currently does not have sufficient supplies for their state water project dependent areas. And these portions of their service area do not have access to Colorado River supplies. These areas are the Ventura, Los Angeles, and San Bernardino counties. Metropolitan will be able to use stored reserve and extraordinary action to supplement the health and safety water supplies. Also, significant conservation will be required to help manage the reduced supplies. So in an effort to support the implementation and enforcement of the mandatory conservation at the retail level and to conform to DWR's human health and safety guidance, the Metropolitan staff will be seeking board action in April this month. It's actually next week on Tuesday, April 26th, to establish a emergency conservation plan for the state water project dependent areas. I do want to make mention that this will not impact the West Basin service area. We are not part of that state water project exclusive area designation. So metropolitan staff are working with the state water project dependent area agencies to develop a program that can work for all agencies that are impacted. So as I mentioned, a public hearing on this item is scheduled for next Tuesday, April 26th. So I'll take a brief pause before I move on to the next item. I just wanted to see if there are any other questions.
Any questions? No, Tammy, you can go on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So lastly, or I wanted to just also mention on the board meeting actions, there's attachments to this memo, the list of items that were approved in March, along with their respective votes, and then the list of items for the April committee. And lastly, for the water supply update, at the end of this report includes the attachment with graphics on the current conditions. And I believe that's on the second to the last page of the board packet. Thank you for pulling that up. So I just wanted to mention the highlights that are in the gray shaded area here. It's the current state water project allocation is 5% of table A contractor supply request. And the Sacramento River unimpaired runoff forecast is 57% of normal. The unregulated inflow for Lake Powell forecast is 71% of normal. So to the state water project, which is on the left side of the green shaded area, the Lake Oroville Reservoir is showing to be 47% of total capacity with 1.6 million acre feet. And overall, the Northern Sierra snowpack peaked at 61%. And for the Colorado River Basin, on the right side of the page, the upper Colorado River Basin snowpack peaked at 91% of the April 1st normal for the Colorado River Basin. And this graph shows Lake Mead to be at 33% capacity and its elevation at 1,062 feet. So if we can move on to the second page, please. The second page is showing the storage reserve for the two watersheds and a couple of areas of note for the state water project. Again, in the green shaded area, the Northern Sierra snowpack chart in the upper left corner shows the Northern Sierra snowpack peaked in January. And this is unusually early. Typically, the snowpack is considered at its peak to occur around April 1st. And next to that graph is the 8-station index precipitation, which shows below normal precipitation. And as you may have already heard, the first 3 months of the calendar year, January through March, have been noted as the driest start of the calendar year recorded in history. And in looking at the Oroville Reservoir storage chart, indicates having 240,000 acre feet more than this time compared to last year. And then looking at the Colorado River in the blue shaded area, the upper Colorado River Basin snowpack peaked in mid-March at 91% of normal. Lake Powell storage continues to show its decline in elevation and recently declined to its lowest level for the first time in the past 50 years. With Lake Powell at the lowest it has ever been, the U.S. Department of Interior has indicated that if it continued to decline, the levels could be so low and they will not be able to generate hydropower at the Glen Canyon Dam. So currently, the U.S. Department of the Interior has indicated taking more actions in this effort to slow down the decline of Lake Powell, and they anticipate finalizing drought response operations plans very soon. For the lower Colorado River Basin supplies, a shortage level was declared for calendar year 2022 due to Lake Mead dropping below the shortage trigger, a low 1,075 feet in elevation last August. And just as a reminder, under the shortage condition, California is not required to make any contributions to Lake Mead because of their senior water rights. and therefore supplies to Metropolitan will not be curtailed, and Metropolitan will have full access to its intentionally created surplus supplies for this calendar year in 2022. So that wraps up this report. That concludes everything. Chair Gray, I would be happy to address any questions you or any of the other directors may have.
I thank you, Tammy, for the very thorough report. Are there any questions? All right, Tammy, you've been very thorough. I don't hear any, so thank you very much. Next item on the agenda, please.
Thank you, Tammy, for that report. That takes us to our closed section items. However, we have no closed session items. So then that would take us to our next item, which is director comments and future agenda items.
All right, director's comments. Director Williams, any comments?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Director Deere?
Just to say some of the levels are worrisome on the Colorado River. I'm kind of concerned about the levels of the water. The reports were all very well done, and I appreciate that very much. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Director Houston?
Sure, real quick. I'm reminded that it was one of the meetings last month, and I don't know if it was this meeting or maybe the board meeting. I just don't remember. I know our staff remembers. I think that Director Alvarez brought it up. We're looking for a report on how we've done so far in the status, because we passed a level 3 for our water shortage contingency plans. So of course, we've already been ahead of the governor on this. And so I don't remember when that's coming back, but I would like that as well, because I want to hear what we've accomplished thus far, as well as planning that so far I haven't really seen happen yet. So I'm looking forward to that. So that's one. And then number 2 is, it got a lot of press, and I saw a little bit, I haven't read the report, but about a week and a half ago, the Pacific Institute put out a big report talking about how urban water districts and urban water users can conserve even more water. And it really hinted on all the things that this district's been leading on and plans to lead on in the future. So talking about water reuse, talking about groundwater replenishment, and so on and so forth. And so I saw an article in the LA Times about it recently, and it mentioned some things. And so what I'd really like to do is, I'd like a report on it, but also to ask our staff, we need to, I think, be more engaged in some of this policy going forward. And I want to understand what's happening in our area and in the state, because what it mentioned was some cities have ordinances about installing water efficient plumbing if you're selling a property, for example. Apparently Long Beach is doing some sort of a pilot program that provides water efficient landscaping to folks. Now, I don't know what that is that Long Beach is doing, but I would like to hear about that, because we've also been talking about things for our constituents and residents as well, like our the Grass Replacement Plus program kind of came out of that. But I'd love to hear what's going on in some of the other cities around the state. And ultimately, I think that this is a time where we all got to engage much more heavily than we have before. I think the state, it seems, has slowly finally gotten to the point where they've called a drought emergency across every county in the state. It took a while to get there. We're seeing that it's going to be very, very dry as we go into summer. And so with a report like what just came out from the Pacific Institute, and the dialogue we've already been starting to engage in here at the district and working with our neighboring agency partners, this is the time to really look at that. And I think we need to look at how are the cities in our jurisdiction truly responding to this water crisis at this moment. Are we really getting serious about people watering when they shouldn't, or the water's running down the street, and so on and so forth. And, as I drive around, I still see this behavior continues to happen. So I think we need to work more strongly with our cities and, really look at some potential policy engagement we could have with them as well, because at the end of the day, we're their partner. So that's what I would ask Mr. General Manager would, let's get a report back as to what that Pacific Institute report had in it and what it noted as policy proposals and what it mentioned as examples around the state that are already starting to come to fruition. And then we could go from there. But like I say, I just don't want to take a back seat to the things that are happening around us, where we should be very engaged with the communities that we serve on how we can really get serious about dealing with the current drought. And I think we're at this point, we don't like to use that word anymore. I mean, it's pretty much permanent. So let's talk about that next month. Okay. And with that, I really want to thank staff. Good reports, good dialogue, and a good report from our lobbyists in DC. So thank you.
And thank you, Director Houston. So we will work towards responding to the request for the district's performance on the shortage contingency plan level 3, as well as the related report out from the Pacific Institute article in LA Times and the examples and what we can do more as a district.
All right, thank you. And my comments will be thank you to the staff and general manager, everyone. Reports were, as usual, very thorough and informative. So with that, and welcome, Greg, is this your first committee meeting or your second or third or fourth?
I have not been keeping count, but thank you for that. Welcome, Chair Gray.
Welcome again. All right, thank you, board members, thank you, staff, and thank you for the public who was on the line. Thank you very much, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.